Blessed day, Earth family. Welcome back. We are moving along, and it's another Mental Health Monday here uh, with the Martial Mystic series for 2026. So glad to be here with you today. What are we talking about on Mental Health Monday? What should we talk about? What are some topics that you'd like to discuss within the realm of mental health, Tai Chi, mysticism, martial arts, traditional Chinese medicine, um, conflict, evolution? So these are all questions that I have and that I love to post, and um, why I studied with the teacher that I studied with, Dr. Yang, and went to the mountain to study. So today, I'm so glad we're doing this series and we're spending time on this particular topic. So, what is the mind? Where is the mind? What does the mind look like? What does the mind feel like? Where is my mind? What can I do with my mind? Is there anything? Is there any uh, credence to the word mind control, um, brainwashing? So, I kind of feel like this is already known, or this is widely available information. Today we're going to look at a lecture by Dan Siegel. Um, and he's someone I came across. He had an amazing definition, has an amazing definition of the mind, and I appreciate the work that he does. He's a renowned Harvard trained child psychiatrist, UCLA professor, and an author known for pioneering interpersonal neurobiology and the concept of mindsight, and founder of the Mindsight Institute, exploring how relationships and brain integration shape mental health, writing bestsellers like The Whole Brain Child. So, without further ado, let's let's listen to together to a lecture that he has about that he's doing here. I forget where this is. Uh, the neurological, it doesn't say where he is. I have to look into it. But this is available on YouTube. Anybody can watch this. But we're gonna watch it together and talk about it together.
And I've now asked 98,350 mental health professionals. I'm going to stop when I get to 100,000, but I'm not there yet. I've asked them around this planet from every field of mental health, have you ever had even one lecture on what the mind is? And what do you think the response has been of these almost 100,000 sampling of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses, people in the various occupational therapy and educational therapy, music therapy, dance therapy? It doesn't matter. The number is always the same. What do you think the number has been of mental health professionals that have had even one lecture saying what the mind is? Zero is often the number, but when you average it out, it's about 2%. 2%, 2 to 5%. Now, this is not about mental health, but you've asked me to come here to talk about the mind, so I need to be giving you informed consent that the caretakers of the mind actually don't even define the mind. And then I talk to people in the field of psychology, close, wonderful friends of mine, and they don't have a definition of the mind. And they say that's why we're psychologists. We're studying it because we don't know what it is. And then I talk to dear friends of mine who are philosophers of mind, and they say they don't have a definition of mind because it's too big to define. And if you defined it, it would be a problem because you'd be limiting yourself. So to begin with climate, mind, and behavior, the name of our gathering, I have to confess that in these...
This is really interesting too, right? Because it makes you think about the Tao. When the Tao is spoken, it's no longer the Tao. And so this is kind of like what he's saying about the philosophers, claiming that, well, you pigeonhole mind when you try to define it and you use the word mind. I can kind of get behind that, and it's really interesting. At the same time, we still need to understand what we are saying when we use a particular word that's so important in our world. What is the meaning that you take when I use a specific word like mind?
Various fields, philosophy of mind, psychology, study of mind, psychiatry, or mental health, the caretaker of the mind. There is not a definition of the mind. It's not like there's warring definitions, but there is no definition. So for me, when I was doing a research grant through the NIMH back in 1989, I wrote my grant to study the development of the mind. And I got the money, believe it or not. I didn't know there wasn't a definition of what I was studying. So I studied relationships. I studied the way parents interact with children so that children's mental functioning, like their ability to regulate their emotions, their ability to think clearly under stress, to have resilience. Everything we know is mental, thoughts, feelings, attitudes, intentions, beliefs, the intention to carry out a behavior and the ability to carry that behavior out, right? Those are all mental experiences. We would agree with that. It doesn't define the mind, but it describes mental processes. So they gave me the grant and I studied it. And then in 1990, you may remember, it was the beginning of the decade of the brain. And I brought in some scientists that I've been working with from 40 different areas around the university, from representing about 12 major disciplines of science. And I said to them, we're going to ask one question. And that is, what is the connection between the mind and the brain? Simple question, right? The decade of the brain is beginning. People are getting very excited about looking beneath the skull at the structure and function of a healthy living brain, right? That's what we do once we move from PET scans to MRIs and all that. So it's a really wonderful technological advance back in 1990 now, 21 years ago. So the question I asked this group that I asked to join together, what's the connection between these two? So where did the group start? They started with the brain. So what is the brain? Let's make sure we're all on the same page together as we begin this conference together. What is the brain? Well, it's a collection of cells, right, called neurons, and their supportive cells called glial cells. And just to look at the neurons now, we don't know much about what the supportive cells do, we know a little bit. But the neurons connect to each other in a spider web kind of connection. And those connections are called what? Synapses. Right now, if I get you to actively participate with me, you're actually going to remember better, because when you study memory, if you activate your brain rather than sit there passively, you'll actually learn more. So this is a reason to do it.
So this is really good starting at what the brain is, because it's easy to get confused when you talk about the mind and the brain. In a way, you could say that one is yin, one is yang, one is physical, and one is not physical. And another thing I wanted to mention was how he's an attachment researcher, how he studies this idea of attachment and child rearing. And he says that that is a process where an older mind, the parent, uh, rears and there's a process of upbringing of the child, and there's in a way a collective mind. He talks about sharing information, and energy is the flow of information. So he talks about that. But it's interesting because when he looks at relationship, and we talk about relationship often as a partnered mind, a little bit of a collective mind, which is a little esoteric, because one would think that the mind is only encapsulated within one person. Interestingly, when you have a parent and a child, they in a way have a shared mind, as the child is learning from the adult, and the adult passes on knowledge.
Not that I'm drilling you. So synapses are the connections among neurons. And the reason we care about them is because we think there's something about mental processes that's directly related to synapses. So if you ask the question, what is the origin of synaptic formation, you'll be asking basically what is part of the influence of mental processes. We haven't defined the mind, but we know there's thoughts, feelings, consciousness, stuff like that. So they could define the brain. Collections of neurons interconnected in a spider web-like formation by synaptic connections with supportive cells. And how many neurons are there in the brain? Up in the skull? 100 billion, there's 100 billion exactly. And if I'm an average neuron, how many connections do I make to other neurons? 10,000, right? 10,000. So imagine, since the way the brain works, this is like your fastest neuroanatomy and neurostructure, neurofunction lecture. The brain works by action potentials, which are basically ions flowing in and out of the membrane. It's like an electrical current going down the long length called an axon. And at the end, it releases what? a neurotransmitter of various kinds. It's a chemical. So basically, electrical energy is flowing down the axon, and at the end, the electrical energy is converted to chemical energy. This is a really important point. It's energy flow. Energy is the capacity to do stuff. That's what physicists define energy as, capacity to do stuff. And in this case, it's the form of electrical energy and then chemical energy. And then when the neurotransmitter goes across, it's met by a receptor that turns on the downstream neuron or turns it off. And basically, it's electrical energy again. So if you had to summarize what the brain is all about in the simplest phrase, you'd say it's a set of interconnected cells that allow electrochemical energy to flow. That's it. Okay, so that was pretty easy. Now, the thing is, the thing in the skull, it's totally related to the stuff in the body. So you just need to know when I use the word brain, I mean the embodied nervous system that's distributed throughout the entire body. Now, I say usually the embodied brain, but my daughter says that's redundant and I shouldn't repeat myself because the brain is extended throughout the whole body. So why say embodied brain? But if you just say brain, people get really upset and they say, well, don't you?
So interestingly, he's saying that the whole nervous system that spans throughout the body is the brain.
Care about the body? But then if you say body, they say, oh, you're from California, you're one of those body people. So I'm stuck. If you come up with a better word, please tell me, because wherever I go, especially if you have a teenage daughter at home, you get in trouble. So embodied brain, but let's just call it brain for simplicity. Okay, so it's totally connected to the body. Your hormonal system, your immune system, the whole 9 yards. The whole thing is connected. We're going to talk about it as brain. That's the easy part. So 1992, this group is meeting. We say, okay, let's get to the mind. Climate, mind, and behavior. This is now 1992.
They're talking about, he's including climate because they are talking about climate change and the mind's influence uh, in choices for the sake of the climate and the environment.
What's the mind? Well, these are very thoughtful, caring, loving, devoted, incredibly focused, accomplished scientists. No agreement. They could say what's mental, thoughts, feelings, consciousness, subjective experience. Sure. What is the mind? Couldn't agree with each other, and they got really angry with each other. No, it's this, no, it's that. An anthropologist says, hey, the mind is something that happens in cultures. No, a neuroscientist says the mind is just the activity of the brain. And so the group is a lot of tension. And then the group ended for that day, and I was going to ask them all to come. So during the ensuing week, I went for a long walk with myself on the beach, and walking is a good way for you to get some ideas. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? How can I phrase a definition of the mind that they might agree on? And here's a definition that I came up with on that walk on the beach that I offered to them that amazingly every single one of the 40 scientists agreed upon. Weird. If you've ever been with academics, a lot of us in this room are academics, you don't get academics to agree on anything, even what to have for lunch. So here they were agreeing on this definition, and this is a definition that's been unbelievably useful to formulate a new approach to mental health that we do in interpersonal neurobiology. So here's the definition that I offered back in that group. I'm not saying this is the correct definition. I'm not saying that other scientists have bought into this, because they haven't. I mean, in this group they did, but I'm not saying this is some widespread thing. It still remains, the word mind, an undefined entity in the different disciplines of science. You just need to know that, which is kind of shocking. I mean, I had someone with me, a graduate of a fancy university, graduate in cognitive neuroscience and psychology just a few months ago. So I said to him, this is fantastic. How many lectures did you have that define what the mind is? 0. Even at the level of an undergraduate, no one bothered to define it because no one defines it. So here it is.
I don't know if it's changed, but think about how mental health is such a huge, topic of discussion, and still maybe in psychiatry, psychology, is there a definition of the mind? I forget when this is, but he's much older now.
And you'll see how this relates to climate change issues in a moment. The mind, in our view, can be defined, and this means a working aspect of the mind. The mind, of course, has consciousness. It has subjective experience. It has thoughts and feelings, all that stuff. But one aspect of the mind, one core feature of the mind, can be defined as an embodied and relational emergent process. We're going to define each of these in a moment. An embodied and relational emergent process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So let me go through that step by step. An embodied and relational emergent process that regulates the flow of energy and information. The reason I'm taking time with this is because if we're having a conference called Climate, Mind, and Behavior, you're going to see that if you take this working definition and really play with it, there may be new ways of altering behavior to improve climate change issues. That's why we're taking the time to do this. So it's not just an academic discussion. So the embodied part means that the system we're looking at, because this is a systems view, is energy and information flow patterns. Okay? Energy is the capacity to do stuff. Information is basically a swirl of energy, a pattern of energy that has symbolic value. So if I go like that to you, there's not that much information. There are features to that, but there's not really information to it. It had a sound, it has waves, but it's not symbolic of anything. If I say Empire State Building, that has information. It's actually just energy flow of, air molecules moving, hitting your eardrum, and it's still energy flow, but it has symbolic value. So we're going to use the phrase energy and information flow, knowing that information is always energy. In fact, as you know from Einstein, E equals mc squared, everything is energy. Sometimes it's really condensed, we call it matter. So everything is energy. But here we're just going to be kind of qualifying. My daughter would say that's redundant, so I'm sorry. But anyway, energy and information flow. So the embodied part is that literally energy and information flow happens throughout the nervous system. So we're especially interested in the nervous system because it's designed evolutionarily to allow energy and information to flow. But here
In Tai Chi, we talk about how the nervous system is that aspect of the mind that is in between the body and the mind, and the nervous system's function is to provide that feedback bridge and gives us our experience and in the sense of feeling. Feeling is very important. Feeling is communication, energy, and information flow in Taiji Chuan.
here's the key thing. We are saying that the mind is not just about what happens in the brain. And this gets a lot of neuroscientists upset with me. Believe me, I've had lots of debates with them. Because I'm saying the mind is not just an output of brain function. Sorry. If you study families like I do, I'm an attachment researcher, you know that the outcome of relationships is to change the way the mind develops. So what we're going to do here in this little diagram is put in one more word. Can you see back there? Can you guys see? We're going to put the word.
So when a child has trauma and they need healing, from an abusive upbringing or relationship, they are going to be exhibiting what he calls symptoms of chaos and rigidity. And those are symptomatic of imbalance. And so he says, as an attachment researcher, they need that developing mind needs to attach to a stable, functioning mind so that they can attune to it and so that their actions and behavior can then begin to stabilize.
Relationships up here. Relationships. Because we're saying that the mind, in fact, is an emergent process that arises as energy and information flow passes through the body. So it's a mechanism of flow in the body. That's how we're defining the brain. And it is then part of this triangle. We're going to make a triangle between mind, brain, and relationships. And that the brain is the mechanism of flow through the body. And what's a relationship? If the system we're looking at is energy and information flow patterns, like what's happening now between me and you, what is a relationship? A connection. And what's the connection made of? Like right now, between me and you, Jonathan. What's happening that allows this relationship to be established?
It's a mental connection.
Okay, it's a mental connection, but let's not define the mental with the mental, the word mental. It's an exchange of energy and information. Exactly. So we're going to define a relationship, whether it's a relationship with another person or your relationship with the planet. We're going to define relationship as the sharing of energy and information flow. Does that make sense? So we'll start with people-to-people relationships, but it's going to be all about our relationship as a species to our home, Earth. That the mind is not independent of how energy and information flow is being shared. So in this triangle, of course, we're doing what some philosophers would say is a huge violation. Right? We're separating, first of all, mind and brain, which gets people very agitated. And they say, you're reversing the progress of science. That was Descartes' error, after all, and separating mind and brain as if they're in different domains. So I want to be really clear, if you're aware of those arguments about that, that this is doing just the opposite. This isn't making it even not just dualism, but trioism. This is actually talking about three fundamental aspects of one reality. The one reality is energy and information flow. This describes three aspects of it, just like if you had a coin and said there's a heads and a tails. Those are called primes. You don't try to reduce the head into the tail to the heads. That is a meaningless effort. In the same way, we're saying this is a triangle of human experience. The experience is energy and information flow. And one aspect is the sharing of energy and information flow, called relationship. The other is the mechanism of the flow through the body. So now we're saying, okay, got it. We're not dividing things up. We're not committing.
So let's kind of review what we've talked about on Resolution Thursday when we've talked about dispute and conflict resolution systems. And from Qigong theory, we understand that stagnation can bring upon symptoms and illness. If, and then so um, massage and any other intervention that reduces stagnation and facilitates flow and circulation, now you have a healthy environment and healthy exchange. Exchange of energy and information flow is a relationship. Healthy exchange, healthy relationship. Stagnation of energy and information flow, conditions for sickness and illness.
A philosophical error. We're actually now looking at something straight from science. This is the mathematics of systems. And the mathematics of systems that are open and capable of going chaotic, like we are as human beings, or like the planet is something called dynamical laws or complex system laws. And this is straight from a division of mathematics of probability theory, the division of probability theory called complexity theory. And what it says is that when there's an open system, receives stuff from outside of itself, like a cloud receives wind and sun forces, right? So the water molecules can also receive evaporating other molecules. So it's open, just like we are. And it's capable of chaotic behavior, like a cloud is or like we are. We call it a complex system. It has a couple of principles. One, it's nonlinear. That means small degrees of input could lead to large and unpredictable outputs, which has everything to do with climate, mind, and behavior. The nonlinearity of these systems we're talking about, that's number one. Number two, the system has an emergent process. This is straight out of science. I'm not making up that phrase. An emergent process. It's a property that arises from the interaction of elements of the system that is called self-organization. So what this proposal says is that the mind is the emergent self-organizing process that regulates the movement of energy and information flow. Everyone with me on that? Right? Emergent process is not some floozy little, California soft, let's hang out under pyramid statement. I want to be really clear about that. This is a straight out of mathematics. It's a scientific principle that elements in a system interact, and there's no programmer here. The interaction of the elements has a property that's called an emergent process. And the emergent process, we're going to take the bold statement, and I know this pisses off philosophers and scientists in psychology, and let me tell you, I don't have that many friends, so I hope I'll make some friends this week. Because this definition of mind, this core aspect of the mind that I'm offering you, you won't see it anywhere. It's freaky. But I'm telling you, after almost 100,000 sampling, none of my colleagues in mental health have a definition of the mind. People in psychology don't, and people in philosophy don't. So I just want you to have informed consent. I'm giving you an interpersonal neurobiology view. This is our statement, that we see the mind as a part of energy and information flow. Okay? So this is a triangle, basically, of energy and information flow. And these are three primes of that flow. Mind is the emergent process that regulates the flow. Relationships are the sharing of the flow. Brain is the embodied mechanism of the flow. These are not three different domains of reality or something like that. This is one reality. So if we're thinking about climate, mind, and behavior, then, our challenge is to say, okay, well, how in the world does the structure of the brain, for example, just to start there, how does that contribute to behavior, right? Because ultimately, behavior is driven by energy and information flow patterns. That's what drives us. So we want to know, how is the structure of those connections made? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But we also want to understand that the way a person embraces the context in which they live, in other words, how they embed a sense of self relationally, or do I say I'm a solo operator on the planet? We're going to get into that in a moment, but just to give you why this is so important. If I say the self is defined as this body, then I can just use up all the resources on the planet, and why would I give a hoot? Right? And in fact, we know that when you have a sense of self that's separate, right, what do? If you know there are limited resources, you gather them up for you and your family as much as you can, because you don't know when they're going to run out. You don't actually try to help out the bigger picture. So part of what we're going to explore right now is how does this system come up with a concept like self? And what I'm going to suggest to you as just a take-home message, and then we'll work our way to the reasoning behind it, is that if the self is defined as a singular noun, the planet is cooked. But if we can be really creative collectively and find a way to develop in this generation, absolutely the next generation that takes over the stewardship of the planet, that the self, in fact, is a plural verb, so that we can allow kids to be raised to know that I am more than me. And I am connected to you, but I'm a member of we. So I'm more than me, I'm connected to you, and I'm a member of we. We'll have a different outcome. Because then caring for the planet is not something you have to scare people into doing. It's not something, that's the fear tactic, which apparently didn't work in climate change issues. It's not just about informing them, because if you inform someone who has an idea of a self that's separate, look, the resources are used up, they'll just use up more. Or they'll say, that's irritating, don't bother me with your ideas, or your ideas are some left-wing, ridiculous kind of thing. I don't need to be bothered by that junk. You're just trying to, bother me. Me, right? So the issue is to go deeply into the brain and relationships to understand how this emergent process called mind actually is shaped by this interaction of relationships and the brain. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. And I know there may be lots of questions, but luckily we're going to do a reflective period and then have time for questions. So, let me just check, just informationally, is there any clarifying point before we dive into some of the details of this? Yes?
I'm just wondering whether the triangle was in some sense misleading. It suggests a kind of vibrate to rewatch the show notes. You said it's one system, but on the other hand, it's open. It seems a little tense, like wondering if you don't back that up.
Sure. Well, energy and information flow, of course, is going to happen from outside of this system that would define in some ways the person's beginnings, or what they're flowing in. But because energy and information flow is relational, these relationships, of course, are outside of the bodily self. So this part of the triangle is profoundly open, right? Just by definition, you would say this is the sharing of energy information flow with things outside of the body. So that could be with anything. It could be a walk through nature. It could be how you relate to your mom, how you relate to your spouse. I mean, so here's the open part right there. For sure, it's a great question because it absolutely is an open system. Yes?
Perhaps we're going to talk about it a bit later, but where does action or behavior come from the mind? It's not that we have information in flow, but it has to be action based on that information flow to maintain or sustain the flow of information and energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we'll get into that for sure. Yes? The concept of awareness. So we're going to get into that too. So remember, the mind, of course, has awareness. It has choice and action. The whole debate about free will we can put in there too, about and the idea of intention turning into action. So this way of defining this one aspect of mind, the regulatory aspect of mind, is not about saying the unanswerable question of what is awareness. For example, if this were a different thing, if this were called climate consciousness and behavior, then I would be up here saying no one has any idea what consciousness is. I mean, I can give you all sorts of guesses about it, that I've written about, but, they're fun things to talk about. In fact, we may do an exercise if we have some time during the week where I can walk you through a reflective practice that gets you to a possible answer to that. And maybe we can find a time to do that in ways that just, when I do it with people, it's kind of a mind-blowing thing. I keep on getting emails from everybody, oh my God, we did that thing. So we can actually address that from an experiential point of view. But let's just hold that for a moment. So let me just give you kind of an overview so everyone is together on these elements. So let's start with the brain, but realizing we've taken the step of defining the emergent process of mind as a regulatory process that is and monitoring and modifying. This is the thing I want to make sure to say here. It's when you regulate a car, for example, you have to monitor where you're going. You have to have your eyes open, and you modify it by changing the steering wheel and moving the steering wheel, pressing on the brakes, pressing on the accelerator. The same thing is true with the regulatory process of mind. It has to be able to monitor energy and information flow and modify it. So part of the idea of awareness or making people's behavior different is going to involve altering the capacity of the mind in children, let's say, teenagers, in people in society, to monitor energy and information flow in a different way and then modify it. And the modification is what leads to the behavioral change. So without awareness, people are on automatic pilot. With awareness, the possibility of choice and change is brought into the system. And so this is one of the reasons in every form of psychotherapy, no matter their warring status with each other, they all use awareness without exception. And I'm often asked to give talks at each of their big international meetings, and I give this triangle thing, whatever, and they say, oh, yeah, that explains what we do. Well, every single therapy uses awareness. So awareness takes the mind's ability to monitor and modify and puts choice in there so change can happen. So the reason when you hear Paul and Jonathan talk about the notion of reflection, even in our 3-day conference together, it's that awareness brings the mind to a place that goes beneath automatic pilot and allows new combinations to be created. So at a very minimum, even though we don't know what the subjective texture of awareness really is, I mean, it's I think the most fascinating question in the world. And I said it to my publisher when I was publishing the Mindsight book, and there was silence on the other end of the phone. I said, isn't that the most amazing question? What's the connection between your mental subjective experience of awareness and the brain's firing patterns? And she didn't say anything. She said, not many people are interested in that, so don't make that be your main theme of this book. But to me, that's the most fascinating thing. Like the physical property of neurals firing and the mental subjective experience of awareness and the texture of things, that's just incredible. Anyway, so at least from our point of view of climate-minded behavior, awareness is important because it gives the opportunity for this regulatory process to drop beneath automatic pilot and then make new combinations so that behavior is different. Okay.
So we kind of spoke about that in terms of adjusting habits, adjusting behavior, and the critical need to monitor and modify or modulate thought, speech, action. We talked about awareness. If you can't be aware of your thoughts, be aware of your speech. If you can't be aware of your speech, be aware of your actions. And if you can't be aware of your actions, look at the actions around and learn from those.
So, yes.
Because it's all energy and information flow, and you want to use that energy and information flow to um, be a better person and a better self-emergent and organizing organism.
Are you saying that mind regulates brain processes and relationships connect? Is it that?
Yeah, so let's look at that. So we're talking about energy and information flow and defining that energy is the capacity to do stuff, information is a swirl of energy, symbolic value, flow is movement across time. Relationships, sharing of energy information flow between the individual you're talking about, whose mind you're referring to, and everything outside of itself. So it could be another human being, it could be a group, it could be a whole population, it could be the planet. I mean, so there's different ways, but sharing. And then brain is the neural mechanism through all these interconnected neurons of energy and information flow. So one thing that comes from this is exactly what you're saying. The mind can change the structure of the brain. We used to say that in the 90s, and people thought we were wacko. Now we have the absolute evidence, some of it collected every summer here at the Mind and Life Institute summer meetings at the Garrison Institute, in this very room, where reports are showing over and over and over again, when you teach people to use awareness, I'm going to use some terms that need to be put in our vocabulary, to intentionally focus attention in a certain way, you change not just that function of the brain, but you change its structure. We used to say that it probably is true, now we say it's absolutely true. Yeah. Well, let me get into that in a moment. So let me just get these two questions.
Mental attention and mental intention can change the structure of the brain. And that's what we say with Qigong too. The energy has to change before the physical can change. That's what people don't understand in terms of healing the body and the traditional Chinese medicine framework that, and it's the yin to yang. It's understanding that manifestation, what we see in the world, has happened because of what uh, because of what has been growing in the energy unseen world, The black is the energy unseen world, and it starts to give shape to the physical and grow into you when and your habits. But you can start to shift your energy prior to action, shift your thought prior to action, and let thought, action, speech, behavior come from your energetic state. If you're connected in a heartfelt way to your family, friends, community, and earth as a whole, you're going to act in a way that action's going to come out to reflect that. Action that comes out with a sense of disconnection is going to display that. Look at all the things that we see in the world. Look at the talking heads on the screens. Are they regulated or are they dysregulated? Are they connected or are they disconnected? So, another thing that I wanted to mention was the in Tai Chi Chuan, we talk about the efficient use of energy. He's talking about energy and information flow. When you are stimulated to an emotional state, you start to use up vital energy and information in the mind and in the head. It was Carolyn Miss who turned me on to the idea of siphoning. When you're thinking about this, that, or the other, you're siphoning information out. That is your vital energy. This is what I try to tell people. If you want to be energetic, it's not about putting more energy in, but about preserving the energy that you have. Emotion, stimulated thought and thinking, heightened states of emotion or aggression or frustration or anxiety, those are going to zap you. So that's why Dr. Young talks about embryonic breathing, state of neutrality, the state of water, not coffee, not tea, not soda, water. Because you need water to make all these other drinks. So I wanted to introduce that concept of the mind, Dan Siegel, of functioning, the emergent process. It's connected to energy and information flow. And we talk about that. Dr. Yang talks about that in his Tai Chi lectures. He talks about how the mind can go from yesterday to the future. The mind can go to the past at all sorts of memories. Where does the mind go when you're sleeping? That's a question. And so Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong process and Qigong practices are the process of bringing the mind back into the body. He talked about the embodied brain. The mind is the embodied sense of energy and information, and that's exactly what we want to do if we want to be free, if we want to be not affected by the world out there, is learn how to preserve our own vital energy and information. So I hope that speaks to you. Let me know what you think. That is just the beginning of what is mind. We have to continue to study that and watch that and see where this research and where this lecture continues to go. Let me know if you want to hear more about the mind, because it's very important for Tai Chi, Qigong, and meditation, reflection, and contemplative practices. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with another installment of the 2026 Martial Mystic Calendar series, Tai Chi Tuesday tomorrow. Remember, embrace the woo, and until next time, may your chi flow smoothly.